Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Earlier this year, President Trump announced restrictions on executive pay and stock buybacks as part of the administration's push to speed procurement and revitalize the defense industrial base. Now lawmakers are looking to codify his executive order into law. Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis joins me this morning with more details. Anastasia, great to have you.
Hi, Terry.
So this is a proposal in the Senate version of the NDAA, right?
Yep, that is correct.
What does it say?
So it's Section 815, and this provision would effectively create a ban on stock buybacks and paying dividends for companies seeking to work with DoD unless they obtain a waiver by committing to invest in the defense industrial base. So the measure basically says the defense secretary cannot enter into any contracts unless the contractor agrees in writing that they will not buy back their own stocks, they will not buy back stock of a parent company, pay dividends, or make any other capital distribution to shareholders. That can be waived if the contractor agrees to what they call a qualifying defense investment plan that is approved by the Secretary of Defense. If a contracting officer finds an allegation that a contractor is doing something wrong, they immediately notify the contractor of the violation, and then there is a remediation path. However, if a contractor no longer meets the requirements, the Defense Department can suspend payment under the contract, it can revoke the waiver as a whole, and it can terminate the eligibility of the contractor to receive progress payments. Lawmakers also want the DoD to provide a list of all contractors granted a waiver and the justification for this waiver, and they also want a list of contractors that violated their agreements.
That's a lot of very specific provisions. How different is that from what was in the executive order?
Yeah, so the executive order, it targets defense contractors who are, and I quote, underperforming, not investing in their own capital, not sufficiently prioritizing U.S. government contracts, whatever that means, or whose production speed is inefficient as determined by the Secretary, while at the same time engaging in stock buybacks. So earlier this year, the department said that it completed its initial review following the executive order, and they said that they identified underperforming contractors in those who are failing to prioritize warfighter needs. Again, we don't know what that means, but at the time, DoD said that many defense contractors came to the table to negotiate a deal for accelerated production. The Senate measure says that DoD cannot enter into a contract unless the contractor agrees in writing that they will not buy back their own stock. And the EO, of course, doesn't have a requirement for an investment plan. Also, one thing that the executive order addresses, it's the executive pay compensation. The executive order wanted to cap executive pay at $5 million. The Senate Armed Services Committee didn't even touch it. They solely focused on stock buybacks. And, when the executive order came out, it received criticism for being a little too ambiguous. How do they determine, how do they measure whether a company is performing well or underperforming, whether a pet company is investing inadequately? There is no mention about kind of the responsibility that DoD has for cost overruns and program delays, things like that.
Is clearing up that ambiguity what's behind the Senate's additional provisions?
I think so. I think the lawmakers wanted to codify this into law, but to put a lot more kind of restrictions around it.
Did the House introduce anything similar in their version?
Yeah, the House Armed Services Committee did not include a provision to codify Trump's executive order, but Congressman Chris Deluzio, he offered an amendment that would prohibit defense industry from buying its own stocks, but he withdrew it due to some jurisdictional issues.
Do you have the sense that on the Senate side, this has bipartisan support?
It does have bipartisan support, definitely, but it's another question whether it survives even on the Senate floor.
And what are industry groups saying about it at this point? There certainly was a lot of comment when the EO initially came out.
Oh, absolutely. Lawmakers will face blowback from the companies to which this applies, and it's companies like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. Industry groups immediately pushed back. They started pushing back when Deluzio introduced the amendment that didn't even make into the House's version of the bill. But immediately, for example, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said it believes, and I quote, any legislative effort to codify the executive order's provisions through stock buyback restrictions would significantly exceed the president's stated intent and transform a targeted policy directive into a blunt and overreaching statutory mandate. And they said that these restrictions on this practice represents a flawed and unwarranted intrusion into free market, and it would not actually address the underlying issues that the executive order wants to remedy. At the same time, the Aerospace Industries Association said that there will be less capital to invest, there will be less companies wanting to work with the Defense Department, and ultimately, many companies will exit.
It sounds like we're in for some interesting conversations around this provision. What's next?
Like I said, we'll see what happens. We'll see if it even survives on the Senate floor. But what we do know, it will definitely face a strong pushback from industry. There's a good chance it will not make it into the final bill.
That's Federal News Network's Anastasia Obis. Anastasia, thanks as always for the update.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find her story at federalnewsnetwork.com.